The title of my talk is Digital Design Ecosystem toward Pre-Rational Architecture. What pre-rational means is actually the key to the lecture. Typically, as architects, we are searching for form, meaning in form, the generation of form. And so, traditionally, we develop form either based on metaphor or based on program. And in either case, we tend to apply validation to what we've designed as a post-rational means. That is, after the form has been developed, and then we validate it to withstand the elements. I think that you weren't kidding when you said I'm battling the city, so it's going to be fun. What is pre-rational? Well, pre-rational really starts to talk about what could possibly generate form. Can we get validation from a digital process? And before I go into that too deeply, I want to sort of step back. And so I'm going to show you a few lines that will appear on the screen and have you read them and have you try to guess whether I'm referring to architects or not. And really, what these statements are is talking about what architects could be. It's from a book about medicine and how the profession of medicine actually transformed from a rather shamanistic type of practice to what it is today, which is based on scientific method, empirical data, research, as well as very much a series of intuitive conditions and trying to determine what could be causing certain conditions. So what I'm showing here is a slide from very early on in terms of a process that was done in medicine, the beginnings of medicine, where there really was very little scientific method, very little process, and so a common practice was really called bloodletting, where physicians looked at curing a variety of ills through literally bleeding the patient, and 2/3 of the blood could be drawn and changed, and this would cure the potential illness. This is a device that was developed and actually is a bloodletting machine that was developed. So it's called a scarificator. And it in fact has some conditions of architecture embedded in it. These are two prints from Gutenberg. And these prints are really talking about a certain division in the practice of medicine. So you have this kind of ritual which became a practice of bloodletting, and at a certain point, the physicians who prescribed this actually did not execute the procedure itself. They in fact had barbers carry on this procedure. And so here we start to see a division in labor between those who research and who think and those who actually carry out the execution. And in fact, modern day barbershops are the result of the practice of bloodletting. The stick that you see here, the red is the blood, the white is the tourniquet, and the stick itself is the squeeze stick that was used to dilate the veins to draw the blood. I know it's a little bit gory, a little bit gruesome. And this is a print from Daumier, where it's after the French Revolution, and the doctor is feeling this wealthy landowner, his patient, and saying, it's bad. So here we still see a practice based on intuition. It was really just slightly before the French Revolution that we start to see the creation of the Encyclopedia, Diderot, and a real yearning for a scientific methodology in the practice of medicine. And we looked at Diderot's famous system of human knowledge, which talks about three key things: memory, reason, and imagination. So even though there's a yearning to apply scientific method, there's still a great deal of room for artistry, for imagination, for poetry, for creation. One does not preclude the other. As part of scientific method, there are certain processes, and really one of them, besides the use of empirical data, is to utilize or to assume as little as possible. And this process of getting rid of a lot of assumptions or shaving them off is known as Occam's razor. And basically, to make a long story short, Occam's razor is about the simplest things tend to be the best solution. And that sort of brings me back to architecture. It brings a familiar tone for me, which is modernism. And the yearning for simplicity, for bringing the nature of something to its very roots. So I'm going to go very quickly through some imagery from SOM, but essentially this is what we do right now. We take sketch models, they're typically digital models. You've probably heard of building information modeling. So we do both, but the end result is still paper. We haven't really talked about a dramatic change in the process. We start to apply analytical information and performative information, but again, the result is really nothing different than the paper methodology as the deliverable. And even with the addition here of fabrication or direct fabrication, for a majority of the clients, we will still deliver paper as a document. So, in terms of historical precedents for SOM, this is something, in terms of a single source or a single model, they've been thinking about this for 27 years. They had, in fact, gone to the length of developing their own software and not succeeding to the extent that the rest of the industry or the rest of the profession was not ready to embrace this kind of technology. And again, I want to be clear, we're only talking here about geometry creation, a certain level of performative design, but we're really not addressing the process itself. Early examples of computers at SOM, how they were applied using AES. And this is a diagram I created a few years ago, and it really talks about architecture, the creation of architecture, as a series of representational means. So in other words, the key players are basically discussing paper. They're discussing representations of ideas. The building information modeling process takes that one step further and says, instead of all of these different drawings, let's talk about one model, and this model can serve as kind of a buffet of all of the different aspects of the project. I've tried to rethink this and to say, well, maybe what we've done in the last 15 to 20 years with all of the technology has been a re-engineering of geometry, has been a re-engineering of form finding, and of the various tools of form finding. But in terms of the process of creating architecture, we deal with two things. We deal with form, but we also deal with behavior. We deal with drawings, and we deal with specifications. And if we're going to boil this down, we start to say, well, maybe the specifications are talking about behavior, and they're dealing with materials and the quality of materials and how these things come together. And this is the mind that's generating the body to perform these drawings, which become these models, which become this geometry. And these two, as a unified system, perhaps start to talk about a different kind of rationale. So we've re-engineered the geometry tools, but we haven't re-engineered the thought process that can underlie some of the creation of this geometry. And I'll get a little bit more specific toward the end of this. Okay, Magritte, this is not a pipe. So we're conditioned to see certain images, and we say, well, this looks for all intents and purposes like a pipe. And I say to you, well, this is a building